There's a lot about television that I don't like. I don't like advertisements. I don't like what they're doing to the world. But there's some, I'm just looking at little Julie, and she's just looking at me like, who is that goofball up there? But there are some parts of television I like, and both Barbara and I have memories we enjoyed very much for a series of time watching two TV stories that touched our lives in a very meaningful way. The first was Little House on the Prairie, and the second was The Waltons. And I call these to mind today because I think both of these families show us something about what it means to be a human being in the truest sense of the word. The stories are situated in different periods of time. The Little House on the Prairie is just before the 19th century, the late 1800s, and The Waltons is about a little bit later into the 20th century. So in watching the two stories, you get to see a little slice of history just before the turn of the century. Then you get to see another little slice of history after the turn of the century. So point A, point B, and then the question is, where are we now in terms of our historical presence? And what I like about both of these stories is because they show values that were current at the time. And if I am a qualified interpreter, I would say one of the key values of both stories is family. In both stories, family units are intact. They eat together. They work together. They play together. They're sad together and they're happy together. Family is important in the very early stages of our Western experience on this North American continent. But as you watch the stories, you see that the families have to deal with life issues. It's a little bit simpler with Little House on the Prairie and a little bit more complicated, but you begin to see how ideas planted at that period of time are beginning to take shape in this period of time. And the big thing is that the industrial mindset is coming into conflict with the agrarian mindset. That is to say, a way of life that was rooted in the earth, that was rooted in nature, that was rooted in what we call God's creation, began to be changed. And bit by bit, the natural was displaced by the artificial. And an example of that is if you watch Little House on the Prairie, they still basically get around with the buggy and a horse. They still basically milk by hand. But by the Waltons, they've got some cars. I think it's Jim Bob who really likes playing with cars. Do you remember that, Sharon? Yes. So we see the change and the movement of industrialization. And what I'd like to notice for your sakes, my observation, is that something got introduced into our way of life that changed us in a pretty dramatic fashion. And I'm going to compare that to our symbol here of placing dark tubes over little sources of light. The role of the family from the Little House on the Prairie through the Waltons into our lifetime has been affected by what is going on in the world. And I have a basic understanding that the change that happened was a change from people basically beginning their lives, because this is key in both stories, church. Church was an important part of their lives. And it was church that taught them to be kind, to be gentle, to be loving, to be accepting, to be forgiving, to be tolerant, to thank God in seasons of joy and in seasons of sorrow. When I think about the way of life, I always think about marriage vows, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health. The love remains constant. And what I am wanting to do today is just to connect the two texts with these two stories, The Little House on the Prairie and The Waltons, that they are about something that we can learn by looking at stories. And what they are about is that things are changing. So Jesus is living in a time where family values are being destroyed. I'm going to use that as an image. It may not be exactly accurate, but what was happening is that forces were intruding into the common life of the people. These sources were rooted in city culture, and they were destructive of rural culture. And we see that rural culture in our land has been almost totally destroyed. It's almost non-existent. The family farm, the little villages, the little communities, little towns, the curling clubs, all of that is disappearing. It's all becoming big and new and better. But what I'd like to say is that many people in the earth just now are not feeling as though it's getting better. They know by looking outside that they can just start, I can just start my car in the living room now. Beep. I mean, it's just about like being like God. Beep. And pretty soon, beep, beep, beep. And I'll be able to do everything, and I won't have to move at all. Sorry, that was a digression. But the world has changed. And that change has not been accidental. It's been a choice. And that choice has been made by certain persons who believe that we are smarter than God. That the world God designed is not adequate. It's not sufficient. It's not good enough for us. We can do better. And so we began to design and build an artificial world. And basically in the Bible, that artificial world is characterized as the city. A world of stone, a world of taxes, a world of armies, a world of discontent. What I'd like to say is that Jesus offers his life in the same way that a seed goes into the ground, so that when it rises up, it will produce more seeds. So Jesus gave his life as an example. And he gave that life just when people in the land were wondering what was going to be happening for them. What was in the future for them? And they began to feel that there was no future. And Jesus began to tell stories. And one of the stories I like best in terms of comparing our works, what we have done as civilized people, and the works of God, is where Jesus compares King Solomon to a flower growing by the wayside. And he says, King Solomon, in all of his glory, was nothing compared to this flower. So Solomon was a great man of power, a great man of wealth, a great man of reputation. But Jesus didn't think much about that. Jesus noticed the flower. And what I am hoping is that the Christian church, in the company of people of all faiths, even in the company of people who have no religious feelings whatsoever, but that all of us are beginning to waken up in the same way that when a seed falls in the ground, the warmth and the water touch it, and it changes its nature. That at this point in history, the Spirit of God is moving over the earth, inviting us all to make a decision. Do we want to go in the way of the natural order, or do we want to go in the way of the artificial order? And that has now become a critical question. Because what we have done with our minds and our hands has brought us to the point of terrible danger. And I'm not just saying it today because the little baby is in the church with us. You've heard me say this before, and I've been saying it for years. If you need a motive for questioning the way of the world and entertaining the way of God, the way of nature, the natural order, if you need a motive for that, think about a little child just coming into the world. What kind of world will we build so that when that child is grown, it will experience health and happiness? And I am aware right now that many young people are in a very sad state. We see it in the news. There's a great deal of despair. There's a great deal of depression. There's a great deal of loneliness. There's a great deal of, what does life mean anyway? And that's leading to all kinds of actions that are so hurtful to us all. Jesus said, I'm going to lay myself down like a seed in the ground. Jesus said, I'm going to step out of everything that I'm entitled to do for myself, and I'm going to shift my priority, And I'm going to move my commitment to what can I do for others. And Harvey mentioned this in his introduction to one of the songs. We have opportunity, and that opportunity is available to us in the psalmist's prayer, that we wake up in our mornings. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit in me. And this acknowledging that over time we have been changed by the influences of the world. And that change has not been pleasant for us, no matter how much advantage it has brought to a very few people at the top of the pyramids of power. I am hoping that each one of you will continue to be the kind of person who brings a little bit of sunshine into all of your relations. Because so many people, and you know this yourselves, so many people are struggling with how are we going to go frontwards? How are we going to go frontwards confidently? How are we going to go frontwards in such a way that the world will become a better place? And that means having the courage to step out of the main flow and making a choice for yourself. And that choice is to say, God, look at me. Help me be a better person. Make me a kind person, a gentle person, a caring person, a committed person. And if this is happening all over the earth, if here and there small groups of people are making decisions that they want to make a difference, then surely we should begin to see some sign that the way of God is going to rise as the sun and eclipse the darkness of our hearts and our world. This is dark, but the light is on its way. Thanks be to God. Amen. And we're going to sing a song, and this is a song based on the life of St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi was the son of a very wealthy merchant who one day realized the difference between the world of industry and the world of nature. And St. Francis chose the world of nature, and he chose to be a blessing to other people. So I'm going to ask you to sing this song as your prayer that you become a channel of peace in the world.